He covers the Lakers. I see him every time I go to the games there. I've seen him around LA for a while. He does a great job on the NBA. Jovan Buha joins us from The Athletic, who covers, as I said, the Lakers. Again, Buha's block, his podcast, which I was checking out clips of this morning. So Saturday night, all of us, are you serious? This is happening? So like normally I would ask why. Well, that's an easy yes. It's Luka. How? I think we know those pieces, but I'll ask more. Is there anything that you've been able to learn, gather, like a piece that you've put together since late Saturday night till today that gives you a better understanding of this deal?
Well, it seems like this was the rare trade going back to like old school NBA days where the two GMs just kept this between themselves and talking to people around the Lakers organization that I consistently talk to in different segments of the front office or the organization. Like, these people legitimately did not know that this trade was coming and had no idea about the inner workings of it. So I think that this was like the rare trade. Like, we've seen a few of these throughout recent NBA history, but I think nothing quite to this magnitude. So the fact that they were able to keep this between them, not let it leak out, not let the agents know, not let the players know, I think that's pretty rare in 2025. I mean, there's a lot to get into with this. I still don't understand it. I mean, I listened to your reaction with Bill right after it happened, and it was like, I'm totally in agreement with you. Like, there's just so many parts of this I still don't quite understand. And I think from the Lakers end, like, they now have a golden parachute into the next era of post LeBron, and now it seems like they're far better positioned than they were looking to be as recently as a couple of days ago.
Yeah, maybe that's the most interesting part of this because I've spent so much time on the Mavs thing. Like, it's pretty clear. It resets 2025. It probably changes like what you're capable of doing. They've been playing better, but it's just a reminder that when somebody like this becomes available, none of your 2025 plans mean anything. And it's a shift into whatever the Luka phase is. And maybe there's some other little piece here at the trade deadline, but on the perimeter defensively between LeBron, Reeves, and Luka, it was like, oh my God. But it's like, well, you can't. Yeah. No one would ever go, well, you know what? I'd say yes, but I don't like our perimeter defense, and now we only have Jackson Hayes at center, so this doesn't make basketball sense right now. It speaks to just hit the reset button because you would hope to get one of these. Granted, Lakers is a little bit different with their history, but as I've said earlier, big franchises could go 25, 30 years and never get somebody like this, and they just got him.
Yeah, and it feels like they've always, like, you could go Luka, LeBron, Kobe, Shaq, Magic, Kareem, Baylor, West, Chamberlain. Like, the Lakers have a history of getting generational superstars and often trading for these guys in ways you wouldn't quite expect. And I think, to your point, the kind of crazy thing was the context of this night was the Lakers were coming off of one of their best wins of the season. I would say, to me, it was right up there with the Celtics win, because you win at MSG without Anthony Davis. And as you just said, like, Jackson Hayes started at center, and they went through half of that game playing centerless and playing these small ball looks. And so they complete a 4-1 Grammy trip. They've won 8 of 10. It looks like they're finally finding this identity. And at the time, the intel I was getting, and I know you and I spoke a little bit about this at the Lakers-Celtics game, was like, they're looking for something along the margins. Maybe they're going to add a big man, a couple second-round picks, a couple first-round picks, like nothing seismic. And then all of a sudden, we're in the media room typing away on our post-game stories, and this tweet drops, and none of us believe it. And we had to wait for Shams to confirm it again, and then start immediately calling and texting people. So I think for the Lakers, this was a situation that obviously Dallas approached them. They did not think Luka was available or that they could get him for that type package. So this was a situation where they just had to alter course in terms of, I think ideally they would have just kept things together and made a couple small moves. But when this opportunity presents itself, like, you can't say no.
I look at the LeBron piece of this, and we talked about it on Saturday a little bit, and I've seen it discussed like, oh, well, LeBron is so great on the ball, which is true. I mean, he's brilliant, and it's one of my favorite things about his entire career. And it's kind of funny where it's like, well, some of these stupid podcasts that'll be like, well, he doesn't actually have the scoring mentality of like whatever. And you're like, dude, whatever, just the guy's a brilliant, brilliant basketball player. And he's put up plenty of scoring numbers. It would tell you he's a scorer, but he's just such a terrific passer, and his vision and all these different things. Like, that's the bonus on top of everything else. All right. But with Luka now at this phase, like, I think if LeBron stays for a couple more years, now granted, like the other day, I think it was last month, they were like, how much longer could you play? And he was like, at a high level, it was like 5 to 7 years. I mean, it was insane, but whatever. I would expect him to answer it that way.
Yeah.
So if he looks at his window with the Lakers and says, okay, this actually makes a little bit more sense, I think this is actually a really good basketball fit now for him with where he's at in his career, because like Austin Reeves has been running point guard, even if I probably like the LeBron stuff. Now, the Knicks thing was a little different because OG hurts his foot, so he's out. So now Josh Hart is on LeBron. LeBron was brilliant in his execution late in that game, and Hart was also physically just overmatched on top of everything else. So there's all these LeBron on ball initiating the offense possessions that I love, but it was just a lot to ask of him to do that at this stage of his career. So that's why Reeves is doing it so much. So I do think that there's a basketball fit that makes way more sense as opposed to like LeBron and Luka in his prime. So there's another part of the LeBron future that I'm going to ask after that. But from like the basketball standpoint, I know it's an incomplete roster and everything, but would you agree that it actually is an assist to him as opposed to being redundant early in his career?
I think so. And I think both players have now had the experience of adjusting to playing with co-stars, with LeBron obviously going back to the Heatles with Wade and Bosh, in Cleveland with Kyrie and Kevin Love, and then now in LA with AD, and then Luka with Kyrie. The one interesting part to me is that like they both have always been the Batman in that situation. It's always been more so the other stars adjusting more to them rather than them adjusting to them, because they've clearly been the best player in those situations. This is kind of the first situation where they could look at each other and say, like, they can make the case for why they're the better player or the better fit, whatever. And then they could also make the case for the other player to kind of take more control. So I do expect, like, Luka is 25. He's not even yet in his prime. I think he's obviously the better player between the two right now. So I think Luka should be the primary ball handler and point guard. And you'll see a lot of Luka LeBron two-man game. And we saw it with Team USA when he played a bit more off the ball and basically was like in the Draymond role with Steph. And Luka and Steph aren't the same type of player, but you can imagine LeBron screening for Luka and hitting him in the short roll. And then now you have LeBron with a 4-on-3 advantage. He can either get downhill, get to the rim and finish, or he can drive and kick to shooters in the corner, cutters, whatever. So I think like there will naturally be a learning curve here, in an adjustment period for both guys in terms of learning to play with each other. They are both supercomputers. So there's going to be a bit of some growth and learning there. But I think ultimately, like, these are two of the smartest players in the league, two of the best passers in the league. There's a lot of similarities between them from a skill and playing style perspective. So I think I don't want to overcomplicate it. Like, I think these two guys will figure it out, but you can go 1-4 pick and roll, 4-1 pick and roll. You could have Luka screening for LeBron and popping, or also getting hit in the short roll and then making decisions. So I think like those two are going to have a great chemistry. Again, I think it's going to take some time, but I think offensively, this team has a high ceiling. It's, as you've alluded to, the defensive side, and having Jackson Hayes as your starting center. That's where my questions begin.
Okay, 2 LeBron questions there. Is he still on the Lakers at the end of the week?
Yes. That's my understanding. He's not going to. I mean, he has a no trade clause, so he would have to okay any trade. Like, I guess technically that there's a possibility here in the next 3 days, but as Chris Haynes reported, LeBron does not intend to ask out, or So I think he's going to stay through the deadline.
Okay. Do you think that he opts out and then wants to do an extension with the Lakers this summer?
I do. Now, he has a player option for next year. And as I reported along with Shams at the end of last season, the intel we were getting was that he was likely looking at 1 to 2 more years, which would bring him to the end of the 2025-26 season. I think that's still the general operating assumption around the league right now, is that he's going to play 1 more year and likely retire at the end of 2026. But as you said, like he's talked about, I could play 5 to 7 more years. We'll see what happens with Bryce James in terms of him being an NBA prospect and his timeline. So there are a lot of other factors that could come into play here, but I do think LeBron, whether he just opts into the player option or tries to sign an extension and then eventually, like the weird thing would be with signing an extension would be if you were going to play one more year, it wouldn't really make sense. Like I guess you could get that number a little bit higher, but it wouldn't really make sense to like sign an extension and then say, I'm retiring. So I think he's going to have to decide what he wants to do next year. But I do think that the operating assumption has been he's going to play one more year.
Okay, I touched on this in the open too, where I've heard it said, whether it was in reports or people talking about it on shows or just phone calls that you're making. It's like, oh, the Lakers, starting to get sick of this whole Klutch thing. And my point would be like, well, yeah, they got sick of it to get Luka. Like, this is not. I don't think that that's the time. Like, you can tell me that they're tired of Klutch. This is not a great example to show that they now have this backbone where they're going to push back against all of this stuff. And that's why they traded Anthony Davis. They traded Anthony Davis because they just got Luka fucking Doncic. All right. But
Yeah.
what is accurate about that dynamic, the angst that goes along with it? Because, some people are kind of going back and replaying it of like, well, when Anthony Davis asked for help, and then that's LeBron 101, and then this trade deadline, all the passive aggressive stuff that that you're signing up for here, which I think ultimately is like really easy to ignore and super pointless, and we make a big deal out of it. I think the people that do it for a living are like, oh, cool, you want us to trade for a better player? Awesome, thank you, awesome tweet. Like, we'll see you with 7-10 for tip. What do you think is fair about that dynamic?
I certainly think it has been a bit strained through the years, maybe to say the least. I think going back to the Russell Westbrook trade, that is a sliding doors moment in this whole LeBron AD era, and just the dynamic between Klutch and the Lakers. And if you look at, like, whenever I do national shows and I get asked about how much control LeBron has, the thing I always say is, yes, that there are examples we can look at. Obviously, drafting and signing Bronny to a 4-year deal. But from an opportunity cost perspective, he's making less than a typical vet minimum guy. So the Lakers are actually saving money on the back end of the roster. But Bronny thing aside, obviously that was in part a favor to LeBron and what he wanted. And then they'll often have several Klutch guys on the roster. But again, those are often vet minimum guys, or at most it's been like mid-level type guys. But again, relatively low opportunity cost. If LeBron had his way over the last few years, they would have traded for Kyrie. They would have traded for DeJounte Murray. They would have traded for Zach LaVine. LeBron has wanted a third star next to him in AD, and primarily a third ball handling / perimeter guy type star. Like he's wanted to redo the Westbrook trade, but do it with a better fitting third star. Lakers have not done that. Then even looking at AD, where AD's often been more the quiet guy. He's not really making the passive aggressive remarks. AD wanted James Borrego going back to the summer. He was back, like Borrego was his guy. He was the guy that he was backing. They end up signing or agreeing to terms with JJ Redick, and that's to say nothing of like previously when LeBron had wanted Ty Lue and Monty Williams, and they get Frank Vogel, and then you go the last few years, AD has wanted to play power forward. It's been the worst kept secret that AD prefers to play power forward compared to center. He's just had to play center because the Lakers have not prioritized adding a center. And it's been, if you look at from 2021 on, it's been a revolving door of vet minimum centers who are all like fringe rotation players. So naturally, looking at the roster, you have to shift AD up to play center because the options are guys who probably shouldn't be playing in like a team with championship aspirations. So I think if you look at just like take all the words and whatever, put that to the side, just look at the actions. The Lakers have not really done what LeBron and AD have wanted for several years now. Or if they have, it's been very like small opportunity cost type situation. So I think really since the Westbrook trade, we can trace back like the relationship fraying a little bit. And it felt like at some point here, it was going to come to a natural conclusion. And I do think, I'm not going to say like a Klutch star will never be a Laker again, because I think it's certainly possible. But once LeBron is done being a Laker, I think that relationship has kind of run its course.
Yeah, that's why when you were talking about the price stuff. I'm like, are we going to do this all
Well, maybe
over
somewhere
again?
else, right? Like, I mean, could be, but yeah.
That's why I chuck. And we don't need to stay on that because we're talking about somebody in high school where I think it's just entirely different. Like once you have an NBA jersey on, you're getting a contract. You're part of the conversation now, and we're going to talk about it. But I did think after that Philly disaster, it was nice to see JJ Redick get him out there from the MSG game. I thought it was really smart by Redick to just do it so quickly. Like, hey, get another game. They had taken control. It was really a phenomenal Laker performance from start to finish, their defense and everything, and the crowd's chanting. And I think other coaches would just be defiant, be like, oh, you're going to make a mockery of this whole thing? Like you're chanting Bronny. We're not going to put him in. And instead he puts him in. And again, the basketball part of it's fairly irrelevant because he probably not an NBA player right now. All right. That's all I want to do on that. So I don't even want any follow up to any of that stuff. Let's stay on the AD thing because you know that he wants to play power forward. And it's funny because in theory now with the roster with Dallas, granted, it dependent upon, Gafford and what Lively's availability could be if he's even going to be available towards the end of the year, that there are centers on paper that he should be playing with. My guess would be Dallas and Jason Kidd will close with him at center the same way the Lakers did when they told him he wasn't really the center, but it just made way more sense. And if you look at that Heat finals, when they won it 5 years ago, I was going through the minutes this morning. LeBron led the team in minutes at 236. Davis played 229. The only other big that's on the radar here is Dwight Howard at 71 minutes in that series in particular. So I understand his point, and some of it's a bit like I've had these injuries. It's like, dude, you've had injuries. Wherever you want to pretend that you were aligned and how you were introduced and everything, you were around him for years.
Yeah.
What is this about when every number tells you? And the reality is like Dallas is going to close with him at center, I bet, in playoff games, even if they have the options of Lively and Gafford.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Davis is a center. Like, let's make no mistake about it. I'm just like sharing that is what he's wanted. And if we're arguing that like they've catered, like, because I just think there's a narrative out there that they've completely catered to LeBron and AD's wishes and whatever they want. And I'm just pushing back a little bit against that because I think there's been some very clear things that they've wanted that they've not gotten that maybe in other situations they would get. But AD is
by
a
the
center.
way, Jovan, I'm glad that you gave us that timeline because the examples that you're using are really easy to forget, especially if you want to push the idea that they've only gotten what they've wanted. I guess in the post Doncic trade stuff that I don't really have a ton of time for is that all of a sudden it's like this doesn't work anymore. When it's like, dude, you have 3 things in 7 months that I can point to that are fairly in Klutch's favor, and it says not. This trade has nothing to do with the relationship. Is my point.
Yeah, and to kind of to your point, they have given them like whatever contracts they wanted in terms of contract structure, so that's certainly an argument, against that as well. But in terms of AD, I think the one thing that has been true, and I think the one thing that he feels is like, I think he likes when playing next to another big and having that guy be the primary center defender, and then he can roam defensively. And I think going back to the 2020 title year, when you had JaVale or Dwight on Nikola Jokic or whatever other big man that they were running into, AD liked being the roamer who could be the low man, be helping rotating out the shooters and just kind of manning, quarterbacking the defense in that sense. So I think for him, like one constant thing that the teams try to do against the Lakers when he's at the 5 is you just try to get him out of the paint. And Steve Kerr has talked about like Golden State's entire offense when they play the Lakers is trying to find and come up with ways to get Anthony Davis away from the rim. And they feel like if they can get AD out of away from the rim, it's going to be a layup line or an offensive rebound line or party, whatever. So I think that's 280's, I guess, argument. I see the value in that. And the Lakers, like even the last couple of years, have tended to play better when they played bigger lineups, not even necessarily another center out there, but like when they play their big wings and they're going like LeBron, a big guy, 6'8" or 6'9" and above, and AD, those lineups have played really well. It's just been because the roster has been so kind of structured towards guards and perimeter guys that they typically play these like 3-guard lineups that haven't been as good defensively. So I get where AD's coming from, but ultimately he's a 5, and I think Dallas is going to figure out with their roster, like him closing at the 5 is the best option.
Yeah, when I was running through those minutes too, JaVale didn't play, but his numbers as far as like his playoff log, even for that year when they won it, is like you could point to like, well, AD played more because JaVale wasn't available and they were only playing Dwight and all this different stuff. But like JaVale was declining minutes as those playoffs kept going the entire time, whether it was health or just the fit and all that stuff. So I think what they'll do is AD will play. He'll be next to a center. Everybody's going to be all smiles. He's going to talk about how awesome the whole thing is. And then I can't wait to see him in the playoffs when it's like, all right, here's the 6 minutes to go group. Like we need more spacing, and we're good enough defensively with just AD depending on this matchup. But look, Dallas with two guys and AD against Joker and then playing off of Gordon because Gordon doesn't provide any spacing, kind of like what we saw with the Cat and Rudy dynamic with Minnesota. Like there's something there for Dallas. But I have to finish with LA just because, that's the perspective that you're giving us here on this. What do you think of this team now for this year?
I think it depends on what they do in the next 3 days here, because if they stand pat with the current roster, as you just alluded to earlier, Jackson Hayes is a starting center. I think he's more of a fringe rotation player rather than a starting rotation player. So that's, and again, I think it's going to be more like the Knicks game where they go with like Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5 or Jared Vanderbilt at the 5, and they play these wing heavy lineups. And I know JJ Redick likes that. He likes the more modern kind of small ball type lineups, but I think this group just has too many holes defensively. Like I think Max Christie's been an afterthought in this trade, but he had kind of become the Lakers' 4th best player over the last month and a half. He was they were 16-8 with him in the starting lineup. He was shooting 40% on threes, averaging between 11 and 12 points a game. So Max Christie had kind of become a reliable two-way wing for them. And I think they lost 2 starters and they really added 1. And of course, Luka's better than AD. And again, you make the trade 10 out of 10 times. But from a short-term perspective, this group took a step back defensively and took a major step back in the interior. They already needed a second center. Now they don't really they might need 2 centers, honestly. So
right.
I think depending on what they do in the next 3 days, I've heard that they're trying to be the one big thing here is they've shifted from, there was this notion of the LeBron 80 timeline of you have maybe 18 months to try and maximize this window. They've shifted away from that, and now they're on the Luka timeline. So I think any move they make, if they invest that 2031 first round pick or a pick swap or even any of the younger talent, it's going to be about getting a guy who can fit now and longer term with Luka. So I don't think they're going to make some type of win now move in terms of here's a first round pick for a 30-year-old center, a 33-year-old. I think they're looking at guys in their late 20s and younger, and guys who can play with Luka longer term. So if they do make a bigger move here, I think it'll be for a younger player. But I would temper expectations a bit and probably look at maybe them trying to find a bargain center and then kind of just going forward and seeing what you can do with this group. But they're certainly defensively, they're relying on Jared Vanderbilt, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Gabe Vincent. I like each of those guys individually, but to have those be your top 3 defenders, I think there's a clear limitation there. And then size-wise, specifically at the center spot, it's problematic.
The only reason he was even available is clearly Dallas, Nico Harrison. They had to have I would say, not understood level of disdain for Luka's entire thing, whether it was a conditioning, injury projections, personality. Look, it got pretty rough on the court at times. I can't imagine factoring in how often he complains. There'd be a reason why you don't want to give a guy a 5-year extension when he's, arguably at best the second best player in the world. But is there anything that you've uncovered, and it's early here, where the Lakers, because everybody does this, there's all these Pelicans players where other teams would be if I can just get that guy into our system and their track record, all these different things, where whether it's a wake-up call to Luka himself and all the motivation he needs, or I think there's another part of it where it's maybe it just doesn't matter for this guy and you can worry about that north of 30. But is there anything you think is interesting that you've uncovered about the preparation of the only reason he was available is because of some of these longer term concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me that this is sort of a breakup, and one side trying to get out and explain the reasons why they broke up with the other person, but it just hasn't really carried much weight in no pun intended here. But as you said, like Luka could be smoking a cigarette on the court, and it's like you give that guy the supermax, and you figure it out later. And I don't understand it. I mean, I've heard similar things: weight, conditioning, work ethic, leadership, attitude, mindset, like all those things have been floating out there. But I also think from the Lakers side, like they're optimistic that if there is one player that can maybe change some of those things with Luka, and to your point, maybe he just is who he is, and none of this is going to change. But like, he loves LeBron. He said it in his rookie press conference. Like, LeBron is his idol. LeBron is a guy he's looked up to. He's tried to model his game after. So learning from LeBron, the athlete who's arguably taking the best care of his body in history, invests $1 million every summer in his body, like, that's a guy that I think the Lakers are optimistic. Like, if Luka can learn from that example, and we've seen, like, even Kyrie and AD, for they have their quirks, we'll say. Like, those guys have talked about learning from LeBron and the impact he's had on them. So I think the Lakers are optimistic that Luka's still 25. He's not even yet in his prime, and if he could have a couple of years with LeBron and seeing what time he gets to the practice facility, how much he's investing pre and post practice into his body in terms of all the different things he's doing, like, that can have some sort of impact on him. But even if it doesn't, you have a 25-year-old generational star who has already led teams to the finals, conference finals, third in regular season scoring all time in terms of points per game, second in the playoffs. Like, don't overthink it. This guy is could be the best player in the league as soon as, like, next season, arguably. And it's just, I still can't believe that this trade happened.
I can't either, man. Enjoy, though. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you want to check out more from Jovan, you can check out his work on The Athletic. Again, his podcast, Buha's Block. Thanks, man.
Thank you.